All right, we're live.
Hey everyone, we'll get started in just about a minute if you're watching it on the replay.
We can get started.
All right, great. So I'm Helen. I'm an attorney at Waypoint Immigration USA, and I specialize in EB-2 NIW applications, and they're the national interest waiver. Just a quick setup. They are self-sponsored. You don't need an employer to sponsor you for this application. You would bring it on your own behalf, and it's to show that your work is in the national interest, meaning that what you're doing is benefiting more than just your company. It's benefiting the industry, the United States, and it's also in an area where the government wants to advance something. So it's kind of like a cross section in that way. It does not grant you any legal status. It does not give you any work authorization. It does not allow you to come here until you actually have your green card in hand if you are not here already. And if you are here, you have to maintain some sort of other status while you are waiting for your green card. So every single country across the world has a backlog. We estimate somewhere between 3 to 5 years between getting your actual green card in hand. So those from China and especially India, the wait is much, much longer than that. But for most of the world, it's 3 to 5 years. So if you are here, make sure that you are planning some sort of you have an immigration plan in mind until you get that green card in hand. A lot of our clients are on H-1B, which is a really good visa to be on while you are waiting for the NIW green card. Because if you do have an approved NIW, you are able to renew your H-1B. And so it gives a couple of perks to those in that visa category. And H-1B is dual intent. So you can mean to stay temporarily, you can mean to stay permanently. So it all kind of works nicely in that kind of a context. But I just wanted to make sure to tell everyone up front, since there's lots of rumors going around, you do not get any sort of a status until that green card in hand, and then you're able to either do consular processing or adjust your status. So just keep that in mind. Also, with the NIWs, you do not have to have publications. You do not have to have citations. This is basically based upon what kind of impact you can have and what impact you've already had. So impact can be done through real world industry kind of profiles. It can be done, of course, through research and citations. That's what everyone kind of thinks about when they're thinking of the NIW, but these are not required. There's many different ways. Every single application I've ever done has a unique blend and combination of different things that they've done. Different kind of work documents that maybe they could provide, maybe different industry contributions. So yeah, it's very individualized. There is no one way suits all sort of scenario. So just because your cousin or your coworker or your friend got approved with doing something, that doesn't mean that that's how you can get approved. It's all very much about what you do as an individual, and it's very much about showing how this is about you. It's not about showing how your field is important. It's about showing how you within your field is important. So today's topic is, are NIWs getting more RFEs? So I would say definitely since Trump has become president, there has been an uptick in RFEs, but I would say it started at least a year ago, if not a little bit more, where things started kind of changing in the NIW space. So this was still under Biden, where things were getting harder to approved, or like you can kind of sense that things were changing without anything officially changing. So like a year, two ago, if you said you were doing something in AI and you had a few documents to show that you are doing in something AI, you were probably approved and they said, okay, you're good. And then things kind of started shifting, and this was probably more like last year, a year ago now, where they would be like, okay, you're you're in AI, but what are you doing in AI? That can be applied in so many industries, so many scenarios. AI is obviously exploding, so I'm using this as like a scenario, because it's also kind of like a buzzword these days. So then it became like, what are you doing in AI? Are you doing it to help finance? Are you doing it to help healthcare? What are you doing within that AI space as a technology? Are you using large language models? What are you doing, like maybe ethical AI? They started like questioning more. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm an AI. Okay, great. That's in the national interest. It was like, okay, what are you actually doing in this space? So, things kind of started trending towards that, as a result of, the different applications we've done and the different RFEs and things that have kind of come from that. So this is building up last year, like I said, under Biden. But I would say, it is definitely kind of crossed into all fields now under Trump. All the RFEs I'm seeing are pretty much the same, in that when they do question national importance, they want to know, well, how is that impactful to the country? How is it impactful beyond just your company? How are you going to actually do any of these things? Why does America care? We have people that are even doing in like healthcare and things with like heart disease, and they're helping like implant these, medical devices to help people with heart disease. And heart disease is like such a huge killer of Americans. One could easily see how that would have national importance, but we got an RFE on that particular client. They want to know more about it. They want to know more about how this particular person doing these particular things, how and why is that important. So they're definitely getting more and more nuanced, I would say. They want to see more evidence, more objective evidence. So a lot of these RFEs are also saying, some of them don't really comment too much on the application. Some of them do, but some of them I find more often than not do comment on the reference letters. And they're saying with the reference letters, that they can't just be generic. They can't just be complimentary. They can't just say things. They need to have specific proof and details within them, which all of our letters do. Whether or not the officer reads that, I don't know. But they are also saying that the letters have to be backed up by objective evidence. And that is definitely something that I see come up over and over again in my consultations, where, I'll be talking to someone trying to analyze their profile and having a conversation about it. And I'll say, can you get proof that will show, that you've helped with 20% deficiency or something like that? Because I see it on their resume. People claim these things on their resume, but then they have nothing to show for it. And they'll just say, oh, well, I can get a reference letter from my supervisor that can say that. Like, okay, that's not really going to help the officer overcome this at this point. They want to have objective evidence that shows what you are claiming within your reference letters and within your petition letter as well. They don't just want to have a reference letter, and you're not going to get approved if all your big items of proof are in a reference letter. You need objective evidence to back up the reference letter, to back up everything. So I know that's where it gets tricky, because a lot of people have employers that are not willing to share certain things that is confidential. But you can redact things. You can send in things that are blacked out, any sort of information, and we're also looking for contextual information. So if you're a person that like writes code, we don't need the raw code. We don't know what to do with that. No one can interpret that. That is obviously your specialty. You know what it means, but the officer has no idea what to do with a bunch of these, symbols or letters, numbers, whatever it is. So we need contextual evidence. So like that in a way is not needed, but anything that has like results, or maybe you had a PowerPoint that you were sharing results with your team, or there was some sort of report that came out with like an explanation. Maybe your company has a press release on some sort of new product or service, or some sort of advancement that you're working on, and they're sharing it out with the world, in like a public facing kind of a document. So, that's where I see a lot of these RFEs kind of stem from. And a lot of people have trouble with that. But that is what is needed at this point. We definitely do need objective evidence to support your reference letters, to support your application. I had pulled up this RFE that we are currently working on. This one actually did accept our national importance argument, but they questioned whether the person was well positioned, and therefore, if on balance, they would warrant a waiver of the labor certification. So that third prong, they always reject that one in an RFE. I have never seen an RFE come in where they actually accepted prong 3 but rejected 1 or 2. It's kind of like the test where if you don't satisfy 1 and 2, you're going to always fail on prong 3. And prong 3 in the RFEs is really important, and I find that is a section that they really do not interact much with at all in these RFEs. It's very templated language. I would say 98% of the RFEs are just kind of copy and pasted for this third prong, but the third prong is really like a big foundation of this entire application, because they're just going to come back and say, oh, well, why didn't you just go through the perm process? That's made for, people that are looking to get a green card that are in your job. But this application is not about your job. It's about your proposed endeavor. So it should be about what's your future plan? What are your methods? What are your technologies? What techniques will you use? How does this span more than your job title, more than your company? So your proposed endeavor should be something you're able to pursue regardless of where you're employed. It is not tied to your employment. And that's another big thing that I see. And I'm always super careful about how we frame this in our applications, because I really think that the officers completely jump to conclusions and say, oh, yes, this person's going to continue as a senior clinical specialist or something like that. That's not the proposed endeavor at all that we discussed. We discussed about how this person's going to help implement these technologies, and that's the particular person that was with the technologies and the implantations with the heart disease scenario I was talking about. So their proposed endeavor is not to do that. It's to help integrate and further these devices so that way we can have better treatments for those with heart disease, which is obviously a leading cause of death in this country. So the proposed endeavor is not to just continue at their job. Their proposed endeavor is to help implement these technologies to help save people from heart disease, help, treatment and that sort of a thing. But anyway, so the third prong, they always say things like, the petitioner failed to submit evidence that his knowledge or skills are not easily articulated in the labor certifications. They've not demonstrated that he presents benefits to the U.S. through his proposed endeavor that outweigh those inherent in the labor certification process. Therefore, the petitioner has not shown that he offers contributions of such value that overall he would benefit the nation, even if other qualified U.S. workers were available, etc. Like, I'm literally reading from the RFE right now. That's for the third prong. So they say things like that, and they always give you like these little bullet points as to what they're kind of looking for. So that kind of helps like guide our response. But this particular person, they did not really say too much. But this person, they did question whether they were well positioned to advance the proposed endeavor, and that's that second prong. So that second prong is what I'm saying is heavily relied upon what you are able to provide. What kind of documents can you give us? What kind of proof? They do give a list in these RFEs at the end of all of these sections, and I can read some of this as ideas. So, they need to show that the petitioner has skills, knowledge, or record of success with proof such as degrees, certificates, licenses, patents, trademarks, copyrights, published articles, media reports, documentation demonstrating citation history, evidence that the work has influenced the field of the endeavor, evidence demonstrating that the petitioner has a leading, critical, or indispensable role in the endeavor or similar endeavors, evidence showing that the petitioner's past inventions or innovations have been used or licensed by others. They also ask for a model or a plan of future activities, which is what the proposed endeavor really should be based upon. The proposed endeavor is very future oriented. So when you're talking about what your proposed endeavor is, that is future oriented. When you're talking about how you are well positioned, that is like past oriented, if that makes sense. But when you're talking about future plans in the RFEs, they list things like a plan describing about how you intend to continue your work in the U.S., and that's the important part, in the U.S. So if you're not in the U.S., you want to say how this can translate to the U.S., how the U.S. is needed, like needs people like you to do these things. It's very much like, if you're in Pakistan or Nigeria or whatever it is that you're doing your work, and then, it's very important where you are. You need to translate that to the United States, to what problems are we having here that your work can also help solve or advance and things like that. They look for a detailed business model when appropriate. So that is not required. A business model is only required if your plan is to actually start a business, which is not, again, I want to definitely emphasize this because this is a big part that people get confused. You only need a business plan if that is actually your intention to open a business. If you do not have any intention of opening a business, it makes no sense to do a business plan, and you're actually opening up a can of worms to where you're going to be asking for other things to be looked at that you may not have ready. So, they're looking for a business plan. What kind of customers will you have? What kind of financial backing do you have? Do you have any business partners? Do you have any contracts? What kind of interest is there? These are the things they want to know if you start a business. But if that is not, most of our clients, that is not part of the plan. And I definitely do not suggest just throwing it in there because you think it will help your application, because it will definitely not help your application if it's not genuine and it's not something that you're actually going to do. But as far as future plan, they also say correspondence from prospective employers, clients, or customers, documentations for financial support. So again, some of that has to do with if you actually want to do a business, but otherwise, this is kind of what I call is like a letter of intent. That's probably not really the right term for it, but if you are outside of the US, if you are able to get a letter from an expert in the US saying how your expertise is needed here and the problems we are having here are relatable to what your work is outside of the US. Again, it's about translating your work to the US landscape, showing how you can make an immediate impact here upon arrival, how the US needs people like you, and how your work that you're doing outside of America is very similar to what could be done here and how that kind of makes sense. So still talking about prong 2, the bullet points that they list in the RFEs. They want to have any progress towards achieving the proposed endeavor, such as evidence of grants with the amount that was awarded in the grant, as well as who the grantees were, copies of any contracts, agreements, licensing resulting from your proposed endeavor, or otherwise showing that you're well positioned, evidence of achievements that the petitioner intends to build upon or further develop, evidence demonstrating the petitioner has a leading, critical, or indispensable role in the endeavor, which they actually repeated twice because I already said that. Interest in potential customers, users, investors, or other relevant entities. Again, that is mainly in the context of a business, I would say, but that is not always the case because they're saying potential customers. But if they're saying interest of potential people that are interested in your proposed endeavor, it could be just that expert that's showing that your knowledge is needed here, that you are needed to help advance whatever it is that you're trying to advance. They also show letters from a government entity demonstrating an interest in the proposed endeavor. So, obviously it depends on what everyone's individual thing is, but if it makes sense and you happen to have a networking tie to a government entity, that can be beneficial. evidence that the petitioner received investment from U.S. investors or venture capital firms or startup accelerators. Again, that's much more in the entrepreneurial space. Evidence that the petitioner received awards, grants, or other indications of relevant non-monetary support from federal, state, or local government entities. Evidence that your work is being used by others, such as through contracts with products, projects, or services that you helped develop. Documents showing licensed technology or other procedural or technological advancements developed in whole or in part by you, the petitioner. Patents or licenses awarded to the petitioner, demonstrating why the patent is significant in the field, or it just says, or other evidence. So there is no exhaustive list. So this is just the suggested list that is in the RFEs. But this isn't all encompassing. So it's all about, what makes sense for you, what makes sense for your proposed endeavor, what kind of documents can you get. Like I said, there is no one individual piece of evidence that the officer is going to say, oh, yes, let's approve this person. They're going to want to see what you have cumulatively. So the standard is to look at all of the evidence, and all of the evidence should point that you are 51% likely to be able to do the things that you're claiming. I say 51% because it's a preponderance of the evidence standard, but that is definitely not the standard we seem to be seeing. A lot of this is discretionary. Obviously getting these visas, it is very difficult. It's getting harder. Definitely need to show like a good amount of evidence. No one owes you a visa. That's really where I think America is kind of coming from at this point. No one owes you a visa. You have to convince America that you're worth taking a gamble on, that you're capable of doing these things. So it's very much like showing all of the evidence that you possibly have, any evidence that shows results or any sort of like measurable outcome, that 20% efficiency that you have on your resume, we need to see evidence of that, like actual evidence of that with that number in it as best as we possibly can. It could be in a string of evidences that cumulatively show that. It could be in one document that's really powerful. It all is about how it all kind of comes together. And every time I do a consultation, I always kind of tell people, oh, I think you have a 60, 65, 70% chance of approval. But I can't really tell for sure until I know what kind of documents this person is able to give us. Because if they say that they can give me the moon, but they can't actually prove that they can give me the moon, then it doesn't really have as much meaning, and their chances of approval go down. So, and it's all about how it all kind of comes together and what kind of evidence, your entire application kind of looks like. But at this point, I would like to move it over to any questions. So if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat. If you are watching it recorded, you can still put a comment and I'll get a notification and I can come back and answer it, or you can DM me, sort of a scenario.
Are engineers getting approvals nowadays? I see lots of people saying don't even try, it's pointless.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're doing as an engineer, obviously. If you're doing something that is helping with the infrastructure of America, you're helping to improve things. What kind of documents? It all depends on what kind of documents you're able to provide, because you can have a really strong proposed endeavor, but without proof, you're going to be denied no matter what your proposed endeavor is, no matter what your area is. So I think it all just kind of stems down to, again, that objective proof.
AO appeals decisions help to understand more about what officers are looking at.
Yeah, I mean, they have them posted on there. I think the last time I saw they were like up through March or so. So you can look to see, but they're not, they're non-precedent building. You can't like really use them to like help your own specific case, but you can kind of look for trends and things. But I'm basing everything I'm telling you today based upon our own clients.
Reference letters can support results, like you mentioned, about 20% efficiency gain.
They can, but they also need objective evidence. So RFEs are saying reference letters alone without any sort of additional proof of what they are claiming within the reference letters. So if you only have a reference letter that says that 20% efficiency without any additional objective evidence, it's not going to have as much meaning. You need to have additional evidence to support the claim within the reference letter itself.
Is there a font size or type requirement for the petition?
No, I mean, as a firm, we just do Times New Roman, 11 or 12 point. That's just kind of like standard legal use.
Can reference letter come from thesis supervisor?
I would say if your thesis is related to your proposed endeavor, yes. If you are a recent grad or you are still in your like PhD or whatever the scenario is, a lot of the time I would want to get a supervisor on your thesis to discuss, that as like a foundational element of your profile. But it depends if it's related or not. If your thesis wasn't something completely unrelated to your proposed endeavor, then it doesn't make any sense because it's not really a strong building block of your application.
How can a software engineer demonstrate individual impact for an EB-2 NIW petition when their most significant work was done under a previous employer, e.g. a fintech platform serving millions of users and small businesses? Given that the product is proprietary and not used outside the company, how can one separate their personal contributions from the employer's intellectual property in a way that supports a claim of national importance?
So, well, first of all, with software engineers, there was the January 15th, 2025 update that specifically points out software engineers. And they're saying if you are the type of software engineer where you're simply taking something that already exists and plugging it into a client or an employer, that is not enough to show national importance. So we need to show that you are developing something new. You are not just taking something basic, like, a plug and play sort of a thing. It has to be more than that. So that's the first thing that I would definitely talk about. And then we would need, any sort of documents like emails, or if you had a performance review, maybe they discuss how you're able to do things. Maybe you got some sort of internal recognition or chat message from someone that said that you did a great job. Anything that shows like results from what you've done. Any, like, if there was maybe, you did something and you had to test it out to see how it worked and you got results that, there's anything that we can show that to prove what you are developing and how it is not just the plug and play sort of scenario. So anything that shows that you're not just taking something that pre-exists and plugging it into some sort of a system. So it definitely has to be more than just that. They specifically use that as a scenario in that policy update.
Additional information for reference? What if my reference are not in the US?
That's fine. I mean, obviously if you are not in the US now, or maybe you only recently came and most of the work that you want to use for this application is outside of the US, that's fine. I would just also add in one letter from someone in the US. This is where you can maybe do some LinkedIn networking and find people in the US doing what you are doing here. And maybe they would be willing to sign a reference letter saying how we need people with your skills to come and help solve the problems that exist in the US. So definitely want to be able to translate your work outside of the US to the officer to show how you're able to help the US while you are here, like once you come, if you're not here already.
Is it worth paying the premium processing for EB-2 NIW nowadays?
So, I normally always suggest yes in a couple of scenarios. So, if you're nearing the end of your H-1B and you're looking to get that, extension through your approved I-140, or maybe you're in the 5th year of H-1B and you're looking to get that 1-year extension sort of a scenario. Or maybe you just have a lot of anxiety about this and, it's really going to disrupt your life until you actually have a response in hand. So I do still recommend premium. I would say, if it does have any effect on RFEs, it's probably not that big of an effect. Maybe a slight effect that it would trigger an RFE more than not, but I don't really see it having a true effect in that way.
All right, last two questions. How much does it approximately cost overall for this entire process?
Well, I can tell you our firm charges $96.05, and that includes the filing fees for the regular filing fees. That includes, us writing the reference letters. Oh, sorry. That includes us writing the reference letters, strategizing the entire case, doing the research, analyzing all of your documents, making any sort of suggestions, writing the entire thing, doing the research, sending it out. That includes the forms as well. And if you wanted to do premium, then that is an additional cost. I believe it's $28.05 for premium for the NIW. So that is optional. Obviously, you don't have to do premium if you don't want to do premium. And we can do like a 50% upfront and then 50% before filing. That's our current price as of right now today.
Can I get a reference? Can I get a reference from my professor who taught me some courses?
So I would say for academic letters, they can be beneficial if they can talk about something specific. So if this is only a professor that you took some classes from, that may not be as beneficial unless you did a project with them or you had some sort of publication with them. You may be your thesis supervisor like the previous person had suggested. These letters cannot only be generic. So we need them to be specific as possible with specific examples of things that you have done. Another scenario would be if you use an academic professor as an independent recommendation letter, but that would be someone that did not teach you, but is an expert in your field. And that person kind of can do an overlay where they would say someone with your qualifications can benefit the industry because XYZ. So that's really kind of using an academic person, but for an independent letter. But I think in your scenario, it would depend if there was anything specific your professor that you had could talk about, beyond just, oh, yes, they took, economics 101 or something like that.
What if I'm not in the States at the moment and I don't have H-1B or TN status or anything?
You don't have to be in the United States. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. I thought they were
Yeah,
related.
you don't have to be in the United States for an NIW. You can be from anywhere in the world. You just have to be able to show that your work could impact the US in the future. So it's really about translating what your expertise is to the context of the United States to kind of show what kind of problems that we are having in the industries here and how your expertise can help solve those problems in the United States. Because every country has their own nuances and stuff. So it's just translating it in a way that's reflected to this country specifically.
All right, last question. Can one eventually switch from EB-2 NIW to EB-1 later?
Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, so we have a lot of clients that are from India say that there is a very long backlog for EB-2. So they get their EB-2 NIW, they get their priority date locked in. A lot of them are on H-1B where they can then continually renew their H-1B into the future. And then they do some profile building to see if they can become an EB-1A recipient. So you can use the EB-2 NIW priority date for a future EB-1A application. So that way you would have a much less wait time, or you may even be current at that point, because there is still a little bit of a wait for those from India on EB-1A. And I'm just using India as an example, because for EB-1A, there is not always a backlog for everybody else, but definitely those from India tend to use this pathway more than others, I would say, because their backlog for EB-2 is ridiculous. So yeah, you can use your priority date from an approved EB-2, whether that be through PERM or an NIW, and you can use that priority date for your EB-1A, so that way you have little to no wait at that point. when you would be able to get approved for an EB-1A.
All right, those were all the questions.
All right, thank you, everyone. If you have anything else, we do free assessments on the websites for both EB-2 NIW and EB-1A. If you are interested to see, where your profile stands, we'll give you our opinion. All of our attorneys take turns answering those, so you will get an actual attorney. There is no bot involved. We look at them all individually and respond to you. So you go to our website, waypointimmigration.org. At the top, you'll see free assessments. And then further down on the page, you'll see one for EB-1A or for EB-2. But otherwise, anyone can send me a chat or a message, and, we can talk through there too.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.